I'm 88 years old as I record this, and I'm speaking quietly because my wife is asleep in the next room. She doesn't know I'm doing this. Most of my life, I was careful about what I said out loud, careful enough that silence became my default. That felt like maturity back then. It felt like control. I want to say this clearly because it matters. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't reckless. I didn't have a secret life or some dramatic betrayal buried in my past. What I had was restraint, and I mistook that for virtue. For 40 years, I lived a lie. Not the kind of lie where you hide a crime, but the kind where you hide yourself. I told myself I was protecting her. I told myself I was being steady. But as I sit here in the dark, I realize that carefully can cost you almost everything. If you are currently keeping the peace by staying quiet, you aren't building a relationship. You are building a museum of who you used to be. I'm here to show you how that museum feels when the doors finally close. I remember our early years, 1965, a small apartment in the city where the radiator hissed all night. I can still see the way the streetlights cut through the blinds, casting stripes across our bed. I remember a specific night when I felt a massive, crushing wave of inadequacy. I was young, I was unsure of my career, and I was terrified of failing her. The truth was right there, at the back of my throat. I wanted to say, "I'm scared I can't give you the life you deserve." But I looked at her, so peaceful and trusting, and I made a decision. I labeled that fear clutter. I told myself that wanting less meant needing less. I convinced myself that keeping things calm meant I was keeping things healthy. I swallowed the fear and replaced it with a smile. I wore the identity of being reliable, like a suit of armor. I thought discomfort was a sign of immaturity, and that by lowering the volume on my inner life, I was achieving contentment. That was the first brick. It felt like kindness. It felt like being a man. I didn't see that every time I chose to be composed instead of understood. I was moving a few inches further away from her. By the time we hit the 1990s, silence had started to feel efficient. It kept things running smoothly. There were fewer misunderstandings, fewer uncomfortable moments. I mistook that smoothness for health. I remember a Tuesday in 1992. We were sitting at the dinner table, pot roast, the hum of the refrigerator, the news on low in the background. She asked me a question about how I felt regarding a change at my job. I gave her a practical answer. I talked about schedules. I talked about the weather. I filled the space with updates that required no follow-up. I told myself I was being considerate. I didn't want to burden her with thoughts that didn't have solutions. I learned to narrate my own life in ways that made everything sound reasonable. I didn't say I was afraid of conflict. I said I valued peace. I didn't say I felt lonely. I said I enjoyed my independence. These explanations worked. They worked well enough that I believed them. I chose the version of each day that asked the least of me emotionally. I was low maintenance. I was solid. But inside, I was hollowing out. I was translating my fear of being seen into a narrative of being sensible. I told myself that if something truly mattered, it would force its way out, that the important truths wouldn't stay hidden forever. What I didn't understand was how easy it is to train yourself not to notice what you're avoiding. I began to believe that depth wasn't necessary anymore. I thought that because we had shared years and shared stories, that was enough. History was doing the work that connection used to do. We spent evenings in the same room, each of us absorbed in our own quiet routines, me with my books, her with her knitting. I called it togetherness because we were physically close. But history is a ledger, not a bridge. I was maintaining a distance that had learned how to look normal. Comfort became my standard. If something felt awkward, I avoided it. I chose familiarity over curiosity. It didn't feel like neglect. It felt like maintaining peace. Only now do I see that peace without presence is just a polite way of being alone. The realization didn't arrive with drama. There was no accident, no diagnosis, no phone call that split my life in two. It came in a moment so ordinary I almost ignored it. It was 3 years ago. I was standing in the kitchen looking at the calendar on the wall. I remember the exact smell, the faint scent of lemon wax and tea. Most of the squares on the calendar were empty. I remember thinking how strange it was that I finally had all this time. The thing I used to tell myself I was saving for later, and there was no one waiting inside it with me. Later had stopped being a future and became a permanent excuse. I realized there wasn't a version of the future where I suddenly became more attentive. I had rehearsed avoidance for decades. It had become instinct. Reaching out now felt unnatural, like trying to speak a language I once knew but hadn't used in years. I realized then that the loss wasn't waiting ahead of me. It was already behind me. The awareness of what never developed because I kept things manageable instead of meaningful. I used to think regret came from obvious mistakes, the kind my competitor George talks about. Affairs, betrayals, quitting a degree. But I was wrong. The deeper regret comes from realizing how much of your life can pass while everything appears stable. I didn't destroy anything. I maintained it. I kept conversations polite. I kept emotions contained. I kept myself useful and agreeable, and mostly unexamined. I didn't drift away all at once. I simply didn't step into the closeness when it asked something of me. Nothing stopped me. No one blocked the way. I simply chose control over closeness. I preferred being composed to being understood. I treated emotional distance as maturity instead of fear. I used to think a life without obvious damage meant a life well lived. I know better now. A life can stay intact and still hollow out slowly, quietly, without resistance. Now as I sit here, the rooms are quiet in a way that doesn't ask questions anymore. The past feels complete, but not full. I see George's story about Frank and Walter, and I realize they were lucky. They had events that sparked conversations. I had nothing but smoothness. I avoided rupture, and in doing so, I avoided life. There's no lesson I'm offering. No warning dressed up as wisdom. This is just accounting. I lived carefully, I kept things stable, and in the end, stability was not the same as presence. That's what I know now, nothing more. My wife is still asleep in the next room. I could go in there right now and wake her up. I could tell her everything I've just told this microphone. But as I look at the door, I feel that old instinct, the one that says, "Don't disturb her. It's late. It's impractical." I am still a prisoner of my own reason. If you are watching this and you pride yourself on being the easy one, the one who never makes demands, the one who is low maintenance, I want you to be terrified. You are not being kind. You are being invisible. Every time you fill the space with practical talk about the weather or the schedule to avoid a heavy conversation, you are digging a grave for your own connection. Don't wait for the empty calendar. Don't wait for the quiet rooms of your 80s. Go in the other room. Wake them up. Be messy. Be high maintenance. Be real, because a life lived carefully is a life that is never truly lived at all. Leave a comment. Tell me one truth you are currently protecting someone from, and then go tell them.